So, my dear students, children love to listen to stories about their elders when they were children to stretch their imagination to the conception of a traditionally great uncle or grandma. Whom they never saw. It was in this spirit that my little ones crept about me the other evening to hear about the great grandmother's will, who lived in a great house in Norfolk, 100 times bigger than that in which they and Papa lived. So the question may come, where did Mrs. Field live? Their great grandmother Field, who lived in a great house in Norfolk, 100 times bigger than that in which they and Papa lived, which had been the scene, so at least it was generally believed in that part of the country, of the tragic incident which they had lately become familiar with from the ballad of the children in the wood. Certain it is that the whole story of the children and their cruel uncle was to be seen fairly carved out in wood upon the chimney piece of the great hall, the whole story down to the robin redbreast till a foolish rich person pulled it down to set up a marble of the modern invention on its street with no story upon it. Here Alice put on one of her dear mother's looks, too tender to be called upbraiding. Then I went on to say how religious and how good their great grandmother Field was. So, what was the character of great grandmother? Or write any two characteristics of the great grandmother, mother Mrs. Field. I went on to say how religious. Now she was religious, and how good their great grandmother was, how beloved and respected by everybody, though she was not indeed the mistress of this great house, but had only the charge of it, and yet in some respects she might be said to be mistress of it too, committed to her by the owner who preferred living in a newer and more fashionable mansion which he had purchased somewhere in the adjoining county, but still she lived in it in a manner as it had been her own, and kept up the dignity of the great house in a short while she lived, which afterward came to decay and was nearly pulled down, and all its old ornaments stripped and carried away to the owner's other house, where they were set up, and looked as awkward as if someone were to carry away the old tombs they had been lately at the Abbey and stick them up in Lady C's tawdry gilt drawing room. Here John smiled, as much as to say, that would be foolish indeed. And then I told how, when she came to die, her funeral was attended by a concourse of all the poor, and some of the gentry too, of the neighborhood for many miles round, to show the respect of her memory, because she had been such a good and religious woman, so good indeed that she knew all the psaltery by heart, and great part of the testaments besides. Here little Alice spreads her hands. Then I told what a tall, upright, graceful person their great grandmother once was. So she was religious, she was tall, she was upright, she was gracious, she was graceful person, and she has the knowledge, she knew the psaltery of by heart. Then I told what a tall, upright, graceful person their great grandmother Field once was, and how in her youth she was esteemed the best dancer. So she was a dancer too. Here Alice's little right foot played an involuntary movement, till upon my looking grave it desisted, the best dancer I was saying in the county, till a cruel disease called a cancer came, and bowed her down with pain, but it could never bend her good spirit or make them stoop. But they were still upright because she was so good and religious. Then I told how she was used to sleep by herself in the lawn chamber of the great lawn house, and how she believed that an apparition of two infants was to be seen at midnight gliding up and down the great staircase. Never she slept, but she said those innocents would do her no harm. And how frightened I used to be, though in those days I had my maid to sleep with me, because I was never half so good or religious as she, and yet I never saw the infants. Here John expanded all his eyebrows and tried to look courageous. Then I told how good she was to all her grandchildren, having us to the great house in the holidays, where I in particular used to spend many hours by myself in gazing upon the old birds of the 12 Caesars that had been emperors of Rome, till the old marble heads would seem to live again, or I to be turned into marble with them. How I never could be tired with roaming about that huge mansion with its vast empty rooms, with their worn out hangings, fluttering tapestry, and carved oaken panels, with the gliding almost rubbed out sometimes in the spacious old fashioned gardens which I had almost to myself, unless then now and then a solitary gardening man would cross me, and how the nectarines and peaches hung upon the walls, without my ever offering to pluck them, because they were forbidden fruit, unless how and then, and because I had more pleasures in strolling about among the old melancholy looking yew trees or the firs, and picking up the red berries and the fir apples. So the question may be asked, what were the names of the fruits referred in the essay Dream Children? Write the name of the fruits. Apples which were good for nothing but to look at, or in lying out upon the fresh grass with all the fine garden smells around me, or basking in the orangery till I could almost fancy myself ripening to along with the oranges and the limes in that grateful warmth, or in watching the dyers that they darted to and fro in the fish pond at the bottom of the garden, with here and there a great sulky pike hanging midway down the water in the silent state, as if it mocked at their impertinent friskings. I had more pleasures in these busy, idle diversions than in all the sweet flowers of peaches, nectarines, oranges, and such like common beds of children. Here John slyly deposited back upon the plate a bunch of grapes, which, not unobserved by Alice, he had meditated dividing with her, and both seemed willing to relinquish them for the present as irrelevant. Then, in somewhat a more heightened tone, I told how though the great grandmother filled love all her grandchildren, how great grandmother filled loved all her grandchildren, yet in an as special manner she might be said to love the Uncle John L, because he was so handsome. So write the two characteristics of the Uncle John. Uncle John was handsome and a highly spirited youth, and a king to the rest of us. And instead of moping about in solitary corners like some of us, he would mount the most mettlesome horse he could get, when but an imp no bigger than themselves, and make it carry him half over the country in a morning, and join the hunters when they were on any out. And yet he loved all the great house and gardens too, but had too much spirit to be away, pent up within their boundaries. And how the uncle grew up to man's estate, as brave as he was handsome, to the admirations of everybody, but of then great grandmother filled most especially, and how he used to carry me upon his back, when I was lame footed boy, for he was a good bit older than me. Many a mile when I could not walk, pain, and how in afterlife he became lame footed too, and I did not always, I fear, make allowances enough for him when he was impatient and in pain, nor remember sufficiently how considerate he had been to me when I was lame footed, and how when he died, though he had not been dead an hour, it seemed as if he had died a great while ago. Now just see, he's talking about the John L, who was his elder brother, and he used to carry him on his, and he used to carry me upon his back, when I was a lame-footed boy. So who was a lame-footed boy? And this Charles Lamb was a lame-footed boy, and John used to carry him on his back. John was handsome and highly spirited youth, but who died in the essay Dream Children. John L, the elder brother of Thomas Charles Lamb, died. When he died, though he had not been dead an hour, it seemed as if he had died a great while ago. Such a distance there is between life and death. And how I bore his death as I thought pretty well at first, but afterwards it haunted me, and though I did not cry or take it to heart as some do, and as I think he would have done it, I had died. Yet I missed him all day long, and knew not till then how much I had loved him. I missed his kindness, and I missed his crossness, and wished him to be alive again, to be quarrelling with him, for he quarrelled sometimes rather than not have him again, and was as uneasy without him as he, their poor uncle, must have been when the doctor took off his limb. Here the children fell a crying, and asked if their little mourning which they had on was not for Uncle John, and they looked up and prayed me not to go on about their uncle, but to tell them some stories about their pretty dead mother. Then I tell the stories about their pretty dead mother. So you know that very well. The mother of Charles Lamb was killed by his sister Mary. Then I told how for 7 long years, in hope, sometimes in despair, yet persisting ever, I courted the fair allies. WN, as much as children could understand, I explained to them what coyness and difficulty and denial meant in maidens. When suddenly turning to allies, the soul of the first allies looked out at her allies with such a reality of presentment that became in doubt which of them stood there before me, or whose that bright hair was. And while I stood gazing, both the children gradually grew faintly to my view, receding and still receding, till nothing at last but 2 mournful features were seen in the uttermost distance, which without speech strangely impressed upon me the first effect of speech. We are not of allies, nor of thee, nor are we children at all. The children of allies call Bertram father. We are nothing less than nothing and dreams. We are nothing less than nothing and dreams. We are only what might have been, and must wait upon the tedious thoughts of later millions of ages before we have existence and a name. And immediately awaking, I found myself quietly seated in my bachelor armchair, where I had fallen asleep with the faithful Bridget. Unchanged by my side, but John L. or James Elia was gone forever. So who was Bridget? Bridget was a faithful sister. Bridget is Mary Lamb, who was the faithful sister of Charles Lamb. Alice did not marry to Lamb but to Bertram. So, my dear students, this is the essay which we have gone through.